Welcome to Perspective and Potential, where we uncover new ways to see the world and tap into the incredible potential within each of us. I'm Abigail Straight, joined by my co host and mother, Gwen Fund. Together, we'll explore ideas, stories, and strategies designed to help you grow, shift your perspective, and embrace a more complete version of yourself. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at perspectiveandpotential.com. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in and see where a new perspective might take you. Today's episode, I have a feeling, is going to be really special because we get to honor our veterans and founding fathers as we explore patriotism, what it really is, and why it's important to maintain. Let's begin by exploring what it really means to love and serve your country, what patriotism looks like beyond the flags and ceremonies, and how it's connected to the very principles and government systems that shape our nation. We'll break down the foundations of the United States and how the Constitution protects our freedoms, and why understanding these things can help each of us be more thoughtful, responsible, and engaged citizens. You know, people show their loyalty and pride in different ways, but at the heart of it, patriotism is more than just waving a flag or singing a national anthem, which are great expressions of our patriotism. But I think it's really about understanding what our country stands for, the principles it was built on, and the sacrifices made to preserve it. So the question is, what does real patriotism look like? And how does it tie into the different systems of government that we see around the world?
All of the definitions there are of patriotism contain this idea of a deep love and devotion to one's country. Of course, like you said, that love can be expressed in many ways: flags, national symbols, or making yourself available for military or community service. Above all, real patriotism is being willing to sacrifice for the well-being and progression of the history, language, and principles that that your country embodies. So it's being able to identify and align with the precepts that your government is based on. And I think George Washington is a great example of this. He really didn't want to be president. He definitely didn't want to be king, but he was willing to do his stint at public service. And I think a lot of the early founders of our country felt that same responsibility for community service. So while the Constitution of the United States is born out of a Judeo-Christian principles and a belief in God and the divine, other forms of government, for instance, socialism or communism, are based on political theories derived from men like Plato, Karl Marx, or Saul Alinsky. And Sharia government is based on the teachings of Muslim doctrine taught by Muhammad. So, there really are several different forms of government. Um, we talk about democracy, and a lot of the European nations live in what we call a democracy. That's majority rule of the people. Usually that's done through a single parliament where the people get to vote for their representatives to go to this parliament. And the parliament will then elect from among them a prime minister. Unfortunately, this kind of government is not as strong because the prime minister can be seated and unseated, at the will of the parliament. Now, a republic, power derived from the people through elected representatives again. But we'll talk more about that when we talk about our democratic republic here in the United States. A theocracy is a government ruled by a particular religion, like Sharia law, for instance. And then there are totalitarian governments where you have a single despot or a political group that holds power and traditionally by force. And then, of course, we have monarchies where you have a royal family, a king or a queen.
I think what's powerful about looking at these different systems of government is realizing how deeply they influence not only the way a nation is run, but also how people are able to live out their patriotism. You know, in a republic like ours, we have both the freedom and the responsibility, I think, to engage, to protect our liberties, and to ensure that our values are carried forward. In other systems, whether it's monarchy, a theocracy, or totalitarian, patriotism can look very different, sometimes even forced or limited by the ruling powers. And that contrast helps us see the real devotion to it, helps us see, sorry, that contrast helps us see that real devotion to a country isn't just about the outward symbols, but it is about preserving the freedoms, principles, and values that make that nation what it is. That takes effort. It really does. Patriotism is not passive. And for us as Americans, that means holding fast to the Constitution and the ideals that it was built on. So, when we talk about America's beginnings, I think that it's important to recognize the role that faith and values played in shaping our government. At the same time, the founders were intentional about creating a system that protected freedom rather than enforcing just a single religion. And that balance between moral influence and political structure really became the foundation of how our nation was built. So, Mom, if you want to kind of walk us through how that unfolded in the early years of our country.
Well, in our Judeo Christian culture, there's, of course, a lot of moral influence from biblical scriptures, but our government is not a theocracy because the founding fathers were of differing sects of Christianity. And of course, Benjamin Franklin proclaimed to be a deist, but he's the only one. And they held the right to religious freedom to be something that needed safeguarding. So, in the Declaration of Independence, that document not only declared our independence from Great Britain, but it also enumerated the God given rights of people that they believed should be protected by a government. So, after the Revolutionary War, the leaders of this new fledgling country joined together in what they called a League of Friendship through the Articles of Confederation. Now, that particular document had a very weak central government and it had no judicial system. So they soon found that they had no way to settle the differences that came up between the states. And they realized that they needed something more if they were going to be able to survive as a nation. And so the Constitutional Convention was convened.
Hmm. It's fascinating. And it's fascinating how the founders managed to take their shared belief in God given rights and then still design a system that didn't impose one religious doctrine on the people. I think they understood that freedom of conscience was essential to preserving unity in such a diverse nation. And that's why the Constitution really became more than just a governing document. It was a safeguard for both liberty and responsibility. It's just fascinating. In life, you really can't escape balance.
It's true.
um, and it makes us stop and ask, how well do we understand the freedoms that they fought so hard to secure? Really? How are we doing our part today to protect those same liberties? Or do we too often take them for granted? And if the founders could set aside differences to work towards a greater purpose, and this is the question that I really like to reflect on, what might it look let me ask that again. If the founders could set aside differences and work toward a greater purpose, what might it look like for us to do the same in our own communities and country?
So, we're seeing this in our nation right now. There's such a a divide in our political parties and and even, beliefs about the Constitution itself. While some people support and still uphold all of those principles, there are those in our country who would like to see it abolished or changed, more to suit the, cultural norms of the day. Um, but, I think, especially in this last week as we've had, some, real tragedies occur, people seem to be choosing up sides, so to speak, uh, justifying maybe some violence or becoming overly aggressive because of the violence, when in reality, the beauty of this nation is that we're allowed to hold different opinions, and we need to be able to have those free speech debates where we can each share our views. um, and that this whole nation was set up to give us those rights, but not the rights to take away the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of others.
And do you, for me, I think the reason that they were able to set aside those differences, and perhaps the reason why as humans we're not always successful, it's because they still had one common goal.
Mhm.
And that is how you come to understanding, what are we trying to get along? If we're not trying to get along, if we're not trying to find a way forward, if we are just solely fixed on being right, I think that's the root of our problem is that we're not fixed on the same objective like they were. They wanted that freedom, but they recognized the responsibility that in order to do that, even if there were varying beliefs, they had to be able to come to an agreement on what that would look like moving forward.
My dad used to have a saying, my dad isms there. He said, "Your rights end when they infringe on somebody else's."
Mhm.
And I really think that is, a good thought for us to um, take to heart because I hear so many people in this, country say, "Well, I have a right to this and I have a right to that." Um, but there again, we're talking about that balance. Our rights end when they infringe on somebody else's rights. So each of us have rights in our person, rights to pursuit of happiness, but we do not have the right to impose our will on other people.
Correct. And I think as the founders worked through their differences and sought to create something stronger than just the Articles of Confederation, that they knew they had to strike that delicate balance. Strong enough to hold the states together, but limited enough, we're going to be specific now, but limited enough to protect the freedoms of the people. So, what they came up with was unlike anything truly that the world had seen before, and it continues to shape our lives today. So, I think if we can take a little bit closer look at how the Constitution was designed, and then why does it remain such a powerful foundation for our nation?
So this did form this democratic republic, but it divided the power between three branches of government. And that was in order to provide safeguards against unethical use of power. So there are two legislative bodies instead of one, the House of Representatives and the Senate. There's one executive branch, which is the presidency, and a judicial branch that was tasked to make sure that all legislative and executive orders are in alignment with the Constitution. So it outlined the powers enumerated to each branch of government and their limits. And they had the foresight to also include the way that future amendments should be handled. And it's probably a good thing that they did because the original document was ratified in 1787. But in 1791, they came up with the Bill of Rights. So there have been 27 total amendments, but this Constitution is a living document. It has the ability to grow and to change without losing its internal essence. And I really think that's why this nation's been able to survive for almost 250 years. The original 10 amendments, of course, were ratified in order to prevent misconstruction of abuse of powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of this institution. Now, that's written right in the Bill of Rights. But these amendments cover free speech, a free press, the right to peaceably assemble. And I think that's important that we realize that it didn't give us the right to riot and to burn down buildings, but it did give us the right to peaceably assemble, the right to keep and bear arms, to form militias, to be secure in our person and property, the right to trial by a jury of our peers, that there should be no exorbitant bail or fines, and the relinquishment of any other powers that are not enumerated in the Constitution should all go back to the states. The other 17 have been added as the need arose. Of course, there was the abolition of slavery, voting rights enumerated for men, for blacks, for women, um, and the right of the federal government to collect taxes, term limits on the presidency, and other legislative rules. I personally don't find it hard to be patriotic to our government because of the respect that it shows for us as individual citizens. So rather than just giving us rules, it gives us rights. And it put checks and balances in place to safeguard those rights. For me, it's kind of like having a loving parent. It's hard not to feel devotion and a desire to serve something that embodies true love for us.
Well, and it's also a relationship when you talk about how it's likened to a parent. A parent and a child's relationship is not automatic. There is work that has to go into it. We have to, I think, respect the sacrifice that has been made and paid by so many. Some have lost their lives, some have given a lifetime of service. Um, and when we can truly respect and then see what we can also do to contribute to that, I think that's at the very heart of what patriotism is.
Yeah.
And, just kind of going back to the division of power among the three branches and then allowing for amendments. The founding fathers created a system that protects our individual rights, and so brilliantly, though, leaving the space to adapt to the needs for future generations. But like you said, while still maintaining the essence of why it was created in the first place. It's a reminder that true patriotism is not just about loyalty, but it is about understanding, like we've talked about. It is about respecting and then actively participating in the principles that keep our nation strong. Today, we've explored what patriotism truly means, the way our government was intentionally designed to protect freedom and individual rights, and how the Constitution continues to guide our nation through nearly 250 years of change. At its core, being patriotic isn't just about symbols or ceremonies. It's about understanding, respecting, and actively participating in the principles that make our country strong. We hope that this inspires all of us to reflect on our own roles in shaping the future of our nation and to approach that responsibility with both gratitude and purpose. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, please be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Your input helps shape the conversation and makes perspective and potential even more impactful. We're Gwen and Abby, and you've been listening to Perspective and Potential. Until next time, keep exploring new perspectives, and remember that every small change can lead to something big. Food for thought.
Bon appetit.